Hello and welcome to you. A warm welcome indeed. Roy Noble here, and it's a great privilege and pleasure to be a Bevan Commissioner as we gather together for this auspicious occasion. Croeso cynnes i chi gyd, fel ni nawr wedi dod at ein gilydd fel casgliad arbennig am y diwrnod mae sy'n mynd i, wel, godi ar ysbryd, fi'n gobeithio. Something that will be uplifting. The showcase for the Adopt and Spread program, supporting adoption sites as they take Bevan exemplar innovation across Wales. Do you know, I've always been rather jealous of those who are innovators and creators in that kind of way. Does it come in a flash or does it gradually build in the mind? Somebody once told me that the world is divided into two kinds of people, those who do and those who get the credit for it. Actually, I believe that the world is divided into three kinds of people, those who make things happen, those who watch things happen, and those who merely ask, what's happening then? The bystanders. You really need the movers and the shakers and the doers and the makers. And the dreamers, of course. But the dreamers need the doers to put the rivets in the dreams so that those dreams will come to fruition and take you to that extra mile. You will find that the extra mile is never crowded, really. They do say that Humphrey Davy and Edison in stages produced the electric light bulb. But I bet you the extra mile saw that the man who invented the meter made all the money, don't you think? Now then, the Bevan Commission has been leading the National Adopt and Spread program across Wales over the last 18 months, building on the work over the last 5 years with the Bevan exemplar innovators indeed. And 15 of the Bevan exemplar innovators were selected to share their innovative work with a new site. Over 50 new adoption sites have taken on one of these great innovations, let me tell you. And over 150 people have been involved in the adoption and spread of innovations right across Wales. Now, the work, you must remember, has taken place during COVID-19, and the participants have had to work exceptionally hard over and above the work they normally do, because all this is an extra for most of them. And they've had an impact on us all, and to ensure that we learn from the program and the ideas that they've actually come up with. Now then, there is a panel of project members with us today, and they participated in the Adopt and Spread program, and they have guests with them as well, so everyone is very, very welcome. And they will be ready to answer questions. And if you could put your questions in the chat box, the host will make sure that your question is asked, and hopefully that it is answered as well. So you're welcome again. So be prepared to be interested, to be enthralled, and to be inspired by what is on offer today. Diolch yn fawr i chi. Mwynhewch. Enjoy.
Hello and welcome to the Bevan Commission Adopt and Spread Innovation Showcase. Back in 2015, we set off with the Bevan Exemplar programme, and we found that across the NHS in Wales, there were many examples of fantastic innovation that we could develop and we could spread and share them across the NHS. But there was nothing in place to support people to do these things. There was nothing in place to support people to spread their innovation, and there was nothing in place, critically in this instance, to support people to adopt the innovation. Because whilst innovation is great and fun to do, the process of adopting the innovation is also great and fun, but it's quite hard work. So we set about with the Adopt and Spread Innovation Programme to help the adopters to adopt the innovation, to adapt it and to improve it to context. When we set out, we had 150 exemplar projects, and we asked them who was interested in joining the programme. About 50 of them said yes, and we supported those to try and find adoption sites. Through a process of elimination and people demonstrating interest in an application, we whittled that down to 15 projects that started off the blocks almost 18 months ago from today. Over that period of time, a couple of them have dropped off because of COVID, but 13 projects will join us over the next couple of days with 40 or more adoption sites to share their experiences of taking part in the programme, but most importantly, their experiences of delivering and supporting innovation adoption across the NHS in Wales. I think it's been a fantastic journey. I've really enjoyed it in the part that I've played. I think that the people you will hear from are absolutely inspirational and formidable agents for change and innovation across the NHS in Wales. And I'm sure that you will enjoy listening to their stories, and hopefully you will ask them questions to learn from their experiences. So I will hand you over to your host, who will take you through the rest of the day. Have a really great...
Hello, and welcome to this Adopt and Spread showcase session. My name is Chiquita Cousins, and I'm the National Nursing Lead for Primary and Community Care, aligned to the Strategic Programme for Primary Care. The COVID-19 pandemic has proved challenging to us all, and especially for those members of our society who are particularly vulnerable and at risk. This has resulted in exacerbating many safeguarding issues, so recognition and support are more vital than ever. I'm delighted, therefore, to be hosting this session exploring how multiple GP practices have introduced safeguarding peer support groups, which aim to prevent harm through early intervention and by promoting well-being in patient populations. Through this innovative approach, the Safeguarding Peer Group have raised the standard of safeguarding and improved patient outcomes in their cluster. Before we find out more about the project, I will ask our panel to introduce themselves, starting with Rowena. Rowena, can you hear us? Okay, Rachel, would you mind starting?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Dr. Rachel Walker. I'm a GP in Glanry Surgery in Abervale. I currently am the safeguarding lead in my practice and hence got involved with this whole innovation.
Rowena, should we come back to you? Sorry. Rowena, I'm really sorry, but we can't hear you at the moment. Okay. If we just leave you for a moment and we'll carry on around with the rest of the panel and we'll come back to you in a moment. Sharon.
Hi, I'm Sharon West. I'm a GP in Tretomas near Caerphilly, and I'm safeguarding lead for my practice and for the 3 Caerphilly clusters. So that's about 20 practices in all.
Thank you. Laura?
Hi, I'm Laura Newington. I'm a GP in Bevan Surgery in Swansea, and I'm the cluster safeguarding lead for Llwch cluster and our practice as well.
Lovely. Rowena, are you able to come back to us? No, we still can't hear you, I'm afraid. Okay. We can't see any other members of the panel at the moment, so Rowena, I'm just wondering if we go and ask for the video to be played, and then hopefully by the time we come back, we'll be able to come back to you then. Is that all right? Yep. Okay. So if we can have the short video, play a short video about the project now.
Safeguarding is everybody's business, but in primary care it's a little bit more our business than anybody else's. Health Inspectorate Wales note there's currently no support or specific training for GP safeguarding leads to enable them to perform this role. They suggest that general practice would benefit from increased peer support in safeguarding, and our group meets both of these recommendations. The overarching aim of my group is to raise the standard of primary care safeguarding to that of those practising at the very highest level. The idea is underpinned by the 4 principles of prudent healthcare, focusing on doing only what is needed, caring for those with the greatest health needs first, and reducing inappropriate variation. With this group, we're all the experts, and we've found that if you get 10 people in a room discussing a really complicated case, you'll get 10 subtly different suggestions about how to manage that case. This makes for a really interesting debate and increases our knowledge base, and after 12 months of regular meetings, we can demonstrate that it also improves care and patient outcomes. So, the aims of the group are to focus safeguarding on local issues and share best practice. Examples I've got are practices reviewing children who aren't brought for same-day appointments, because that's a recognised marker for vulnerability. The most important and valued aspect of our meetings is that we discuss interesting or challenging cases in a supportive and confidential setting. Our group is not for the clear-cut cases. We all know what to do with obvious cases of sexual or physical abuse. We've got our laminated pages of protocols to follow for that. Our group's for the more ambiguous shades of grey cases. You walk a tightrope between referring inappropriately and placing an already struggling family under further stress, or not referring and leaving a vulnerable adult or child at risk of further harm. So if you discuss a case confidentially with 9 other safeguarding leads who all agree and share your concern and feel that a referral is appropriate, that gives your decision credibility and gives the clinician support and confidence. The meetings are multidisciplinary. The core members are the safeguarding leads, but other doctors with an interesting case to present are always welcome, as are medical students and trainee GPs, who often bring a really interesting take on cases. By sharing best practice in this way, we aim to facilitate all practices increasing their safeguarding activities to those practicing at the highest level. Why does all of this matter? The evidence that demonstrates the potentially lifelong damaging effect of adverse childhood experiences is clear and compelling. We know that the emotional and economic impact of domestic abuse profoundly limits the ability of affected individuals to reach their full potential. We have the opportunity to address this more effectively.
Thank you. Okay, so Rowena, do we have you back? Can we hear you?
Can you hear me now?
We can. Lovely. Would you like to introduce yourself first?
Yes, sorry about that. I'm Rowena Christmas. I'm a GP from a rural practice in Monmouthshire, and I set up the original cluster safeguarding peer support group, and was lucky enough to be involved with the Adopt and Spread project last year.
Brilliant, lovely, thank you. And as we've seen from the video, you've just talked to us a little bit about the project. So perhaps I can ask if you can start with explaining let's start with the current context for general practice. Given all the priorities for COVID-19, why do you think this is a priority area? Rowena.
Good question. And unfortunately, one of the really significant impacts of COVID-19 is that it's exacerbated many of the safeguarding issues that are faced by our patients. And so recognition and support are more vital than ever right now. For example, there was a huge increase in calls to domestic violence helplines during the lockdown. And tragically, early in the pandemic, there was a case of domestic homicide in Torvine. Now, we know that lockdown meant that children are at far greater risk from adverse childhood experiences, and the isolation meant that they no longer had the protection of people like teachers or health visitors or wider family members who'd usually be looking out for vulnerable individuals. And then the elderly had to cope with isolation and terrible loneliness, which placed them at greater risk from a broad variety of harms, from neglect to financial scams. Now, us in primary care, we've always had a key role to play in protecting vulnerable adults and children in society. We're in a unique position to recognise concerns because these people come into our surgeries. We know them and they're likely to trust us. So if we recognise problems, we can then signpost people to help and support. And that will benefit society as a whole and help us to address health inequalities. As a specific example, domestic abuse takes an appalling toll on people and families who are affected. It's a major public health problem because of the long-term health consequences for people who've experienced it. More than 2 million people over 16 years old in England and Wales suffer domestic violence in some form every year. That's 1 in 4 women and 1 in 6 men. The children who are trapped seeing and hearing the abuse are also deeply affected. And as well as this personal tragic impact for every family affected, domestic abuse costs public services £4 billion each year, with the NHS bearing almost half of that cost. So if we can practice curiously and look for potential issues, we can offer victims and perpetrators practical support. In this way, we've got the opportunity to change people's lives. Health professionals can only achieve this when we feel confident and supported, so routine inquiry becomes a fundamental part of the skills and practice of our everyday work. Studies show that people are much more likely to tell you what's happening to them if they're asked directly, and much less likely to volunteer information spontaneously.
Thank you. That's really interesting. So, Laura, can you say a little bit about the alternative to running cluster-based groups for safeguarding?
Yes, thanks. A practice safeguarding lead is usually a GP who takes responsibility for practice training, policy and protocol development. The safeguarding lead typically deals with the vast majority of writing reports and actions correspondence relating to safeguarding issues, while often providing guidance and support to colleagues who have safeguarding concerns regarding a patient or a family. Being a safeguarding lead GP is a complex and extremely important role, but doing it well is a challenging and time-consuming role. It lacks any formal training accreditation. Without cluster-based groups, each practice safeguarding lead operates in isolation. There is little communication between lead GPs from other practices, and we are each facing similar challenges and highly sensitive issues without any formal peer support. Given the weight of the role and being aware of the immeasurable impact that we can make by performing the role well, it is easy to feel overwhelmed and lack confidence. Unsurprisingly, Health Inspectorate Wales identified huge variations in practice, and they highlighted the need for improved understanding and training in safeguarding in primary care. The RCGP have highlighted the need for peer support in safeguarding practice. We have already all felt the benefit of having created a supportive and confidential forum in which we are able to share experiences, discuss cases, and also share protocols and information.
Thank you. So, Verena, if I can come back to you again, what sort of case studies do you have for how the safeguarding groups have made a difference for someone in your community?
Well, in the time we've been running our groups in Monmouthshire, we've covered the most remarkable diversity of issues, cases that include neglect, historic and current sexual abuse, capacity issues, concern about gender dysphoria and safeguarding, fabricated and induced illness, and even female genital mutilation, which we weren't expecting really in leafy Monmouthshire. Now, these situations are often highly complex, and having the opportunity to reflect on them more deeply with the protected time and with interested and skilled colleagues is incredibly valuable. We had a particularly useful case when the IRIS domestic abuse advisor joined us for one of our meetings and gave a presentation. Afterwards, we were discussing complex cases, and a case of coercive control was described. Now, in this situation, the perpetrator had escalated his behaviour to stalking. He'd become verbally and physically aggressive, and these episodes were increasing in frequency and severity, and other people in the local area were becoming aware of it and referred to Women's Aid and to social services, but the victim was still feeling isolated and unsupported and was very afraid for both herself and her child. And when the IRIS advisor heard the detail of what was happening, she shocked us in the meeting by advising that this victim was at high risk of domestic homicide. This information was then used to escalate the referral to social services, and the police became involved. And the final outcome was that the child was placed on the at-risk register, a non-molestation order was put in place, and contact with the father was only allowed in a supervised setting. Now, it can be really daunting to make these judgment calls on your own. It's critically important to manage safeguarding concerns well, but as we've said, it's challenging and time-consuming to do that. You've got the possibility of leaving a vulnerable person at risk of harm, balanced always against the risk of intervening unnecessarily and placing stress on an already struggling family. So do no harm is never more pertinent than in these cases. And doctors can find themselves isolated addressing these highly sensitive issues, which in turn increases the risk of them developing stress and burnout. So the safeguarding groups lend support to feel confident that you're making the right decision.
Thank you. And I think that for me has really kind of emphasised the wide-ranging issues that you could potentially as a practice come across in primary care. And I think probably people don't necessarily understand that. They see small aspects but don't see the breadth of what you might have to support and manage within practice. Thank you. So Sharon, perhaps you can describe what a newcomer to this approach would need to get started.
Okay, thank you. So the aim of our groups was to meet quarterly and to involve the safeguarding leads from each practice in the cluster. So you may well be aware of the different practices in your own cluster, but some of us took on more than one cluster, and so information about who the practices are can be easily obtained from the cluster lead, and that can be a useful person to make contact with, as we'll find out a little bit later. So all I did was find out the practices, emailed all the practice managers, asked who their safeguarding lead was, and each practice does have a named safeguarding lead. So it was quite easy to find out that information, but it does involve quite a bit of time and enthusiasm to try and engage people through emails. So the meetings then should involve a presentation on a topic that's relevant to safeguarding, and that means that all the leads can be kept up to date with best practice, and then they can take this information back and disseminate it to their practice teams. So to start off with, at least initially, as the cluster lead, you'd need to prepare those presentations. So what I did at my first meeting, we were in the middle of the pandemic, and it was very obvious that domestic abuse was becoming one of the key issues. So I did a presentation, shared it with the safeguarding leads from the practices, and then they had presentations that they could then take back to their own practices, and they were able to train their GPs and clinical staff, but also their reception and admin staff, and they certainly found that quite useful. So one of the other aims of the group, and something that you'd need to look at as a newcomer, is to pool resources and to share protocols so that you're not all working in isolation. And my safeguarding leads within my cluster, Caerphilly South, were very keen to have a policy that we all adopted rather than each having our own policies. So I managed to develop that for the cluster. The other thing that Rowena mentioned in the video is that case-based discussion is key to the impact that these groups can have on improving the quality of safeguarding and the confidence of the leads to do it well. So we do encourage participants to bring their own difficult or complex cases so that they can discuss them in a supportive and confidential setting. So when I arranged meetings, I emailed participants in advance to let them know the topic, whether that was domestic abuse or managing cases with health visitors. And I asked them to bring their own cases for discussion. So you do need to be somebody who communicates quite well to be able to support participants when they discuss cases, because they may have impacted on them personally and professionally. And they may also be slightly reticent at first because they're worried about being criticised. And your job as the lead is to make that a safe and supportive environment. So the group lead should also make themselves available for support and advice between meetings. And that's an area where you have to be approachable and you have to be enthusiastic, but you also have to have the time to commit to it. I explained to my safeguarding leads how they could contact me during working hours, and explained to them the best ways of getting the support and the advice that they needed. So I was quite explicit with them with my boundaries, explained that I didn't work full time, that I was not to be used in an emergency, but also I wasn't replacing any of the current safeguarding roles within the trust. So the hope is that these group activities, so your personal support and advice as cluster lead, will help towards another key aim of the group, which is improving resilience through peer support and also improving the quality of the safeguarding. And attendance and participation at these groups provides evidence to support level 3 safeguarding accreditation for leads. And though emphasising those benefits with your participants will help to engage them and encourage them to come along to the meetings.
Thank you, Sharon. I think that's really interesting about that whole cluster and GP practice engagement. It's really important in safeguarding. So, Laura, perhaps you can talk to us about what kind of permissions the members of the group needed from their line manager or senior team to get involved with the group.
Yeah, I'll mostly be covering my experience, just because, but trying to pool other leads' experiences within what I'm saying here. So what I did is, in the earlier stages of the Adopt and Spread programme, I discussed the project with the head of nursing from our Health Board's corporate safeguarding team. I then contacted the safeguarding lead GPs from the cluster and introduced the project and outlined its aims. I then presented the project at cluster level at a protected learning session, and this was met with really enthusiastic feedback. And since then, I've been well supported by our cluster project and development manager, which has been a great help, actually. Then, due to COVID, it obviously then took a number of months to arrange our first meeting. So during that time, I stayed in contact and tried to maintain interest via a WhatsApp group and an email group as well. We shared information and documents, and also benefited from sharing advice on safeguarding cases that had arisen during that time. I submitted a cluster proposal for consideration of ongoing funding for the project, and this was granted with some really positive feedback. And then following this, I've been in contact with the Health Board's Planning Support and Cluster Development Manager, and I've shared the web pages and invitation to this showcase event with them. The funding has been granted for a Llwchwr GP safeguarding peer group until March 2022, and the plan is for me to keep all parties updated with the peer group's activity, and I'll evidence this with the group's progress with meeting minutes, and also request feedback from the group so I can share that. And I've heard from the other safeguarding group adoptees that Health Board safeguarding teams from their areas have also been very supportive of the scheme so far.
That's really good to know, isn't it? That you're kind of getting that widespread support as well. Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Rachel, what would you say was adapted when other teams took on this innovation?
I think when we all took on this project, we knew that the innovation would be kind of fine-tuned and tweaked to adapt it to our practice population needs and what our cluster expectations were. I think COVID came along and kind of blew those adaptations out of the water a little bit. So in essence, we started off as a group of like-minded clinicians all undertaking the role of safeguarding lead in our practices. We saw this project as an opportunity to consolidate this and provide the support to each other, and also the recognition that safeguarding needs in primary care. So between the 5 adoptees, we cover 8 cluster NCNs, which is quite a breadth of geographical area, as well as quite a dynamic practice population. So as I say, we all had to adapt the plan to refine it to our clusters. In essence, we all approached our cluster NCN meetings to gauge response to the practice and kind of see how we could facilitate the plan moving forwards. And I think essentially all of us had plans to have face-to-face meetings March, April 2020, and as Laura said, she managed to get funding as well. I think that's really where the impact of COVID hit, just as we were about to get the ball rolling and get the meetings on our way. Clearly, we then had to pause, reconsider, and massively adapt the innovation, moving things forward. Obviously, the unprecedented demands on the NHS at the time meant the project did take a bit of a back burner for some of us. We had obviously significant clinical impact of COVID, as well as personal and staff illness, and a very evolving way of service delivery. I think the second wave and also vaccination provision hit us again as we were trying to get things back on track later on in the year. For some of us, clusters, practices became, they merged together, which meant there were less safeguarding leads available to form the groups. And also the dissolution of some practices meant that the patient demand and the capacity was really stretched. Through our new working patterns, I think it became very clear that face-to-face meetings were going to be unviable, certainly for the near future. And I think for some of us, that meant very rapid honing of our IT skills to be able to put this onto an online forum. To date, most of us have managed to facilitate meetings with our clusters online, and we've managed to formulate these professional connections to be able to take the innovation forwards. I think as adoptees, we've had to be very sensitive to the current situation that obviously we're all facing. For this project to work, we obviously need the enthusiasm and engagement of our safeguarding lead colleagues. I hope that kind of the move to online will facilitate this for the time being, and that the support that we're able to offer through this project will be able to move forwards.
Lovely, thank you. And I think we all totally agree with you about the technology and the current and ongoing struggles you have with it sometimes. Okay, lovely, thank you. So I can see we've got a question from Abby in the sidebar. Rowena, would you be happy to take that one, please?
Yeah, of course. So Abby's asking, with the complex cases that we discuss in the meetings, what can we involve other professionals? Now, I'm just going to speak from Monmouthshire, because we've had 3 years to have these meetings. We've had a lot of face-to-face meetings before the pandemic, and the value in making these meetings multidisciplinary is absolutely enormous. So we've had the safeguarding lead nurse from our health board would often come along and join us, and honestly, you know, we feel we know a little bit about safeguarding as safeguarding leads, but her depth of knowledge was just extraordinary, and she was really good. You know, she'd be quite challenging, and you know, would always add a lot of value almost to every case that we'd managed. We had one meeting where we had 2 barristers come along, and they had a sort of understanding of the Mental Capacity Act and so on, from a legal background, whereas we've got a very medical background. So that was incredibly interesting, and it was also a bit daunting because there was a lot of stuff that we didn't know. So that was useful. And then we've had IRIS, domestic abuse support workers, come and talk to us. Social workers, again, a completely different perspective, and it's so brilliant to bring those people along. So because we've had a couple of social workers come and join us regularly, all of us in our group now are very comfortable to pick up the phone and say, "Oh, Becky, I've got this complicated case," whereas before we wouldn't have known Becky, and now she's a human being rather than just a name on a piece of paper. So the more we can do with multidisciplinary working, the better these vulnerable people will be protected by us all, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I quite agree. And I think you're right. It just brings such a different perspective when you widen that group, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think Abby also mentioned about kind of a patient, client, family. So how are they kind of involved in this?
Well, it's very much a sort of professionals meeting. It wouldn't really be the right forum to have family members come along and join us. But of course, although we completely anonymise cases that we present, and although at the beginning of every single meeting we say we've got to be so careful, you know, obviously as doctors we always work with strict confidentiality rules, but these cases are so sensitive, and particularly where we work, people will often be presenting cases where other doctors, they may send their children to school in the same school. So it's really tricky. So we always have to really emphasize the importance of confidentiality. And I will ask the families when I'm going to present their cases to the group. I'll explain that it's going to be anonymized, but I ask them for permission. I explain I'm asking advice from other like-minded safeguarding specialists to get more expertise. And I haven't had anyone say they don't want that to happen yet. But it is such a sensitive area. We do have to be really cautious about that.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that's a really important point, isn't it, about kind of asking that permission. And it's really interesting that nobody's kind of turned around and said, no, I don't want you to do that. So it's obviously something that they can see that value in as well. Okay. So just listening to the great work you've been doing, it sounds really good. And I can kind of see the benefit that it's given, both to you professionally as a group and also to the populations that you're caring for. Just curious about some of the challenges you've experienced in trying to get it up and running, and if other people were interested in doing this, what would you say are the key challenges for this type of work? I don't know who would like to answer that one.
I think the biggest challenge for GPs for pretty much every aspect of our working lives is time. Safeguarding is particularly challenging anyway, because it's not only emotionally draining and often very upsetting, but these cases take ages. If you've got a domestic abuse case or a vulnerable adult who may be being abused, they are never 10-minute consultations. So the whole thing about safeguarding takes a lot of time. And of course, these meetings take time. They're a couple of hours every quarter, or every time a doctor contacts me for help or advice about a tricky case in between meetings, I will definitely sort of window out 90 minutes for that chat. They take a while. So time is the biggest thing. And if you can protect that time, that will help. And the way to protect that time is to pay for it. So we really, really need the funding for the safeguarding leads to do this really important work. So time, money, and the other one is that we desperately need fantastic people like Sharon and Rachel and Laura and Sian and Lois to step up and take on this role. And there's so many GPs and the whole primary care teams, but there's so many GPs who are just feeling absolutely stretched like elastic about to snap. The idea of saying, oh yes, I'll do one more thing on top of everything else I'm doing is really daunting. Whereas actually, if you do something extra or different, it almost sort of balances the challenge of a sort of busy morning surgery, and it gives you a bit more hope and energy and positivity. So once you get people to step up, generally they're really happy that they've done so, but it's really important that we encourage people of the value of taking on this role. And if people do, there's tons and tons of help and support that us established safeguarding leads are keen to offer. We're here on the end of an email or the phone anytime for a bit of help and support. So please think about taking it on.
Lovely, thank you. And I think that's, I can hear the heartfelt plea behind that as well. But it must be a very rewarding opportunity to do this. And I think you're right. One of the first things I was thinking about, this must take some time. So trying to fit that into a busy GP schedule must be quite tricky. Well, thank you very much. It's been lovely hearing about it. We're going to play another video now. We're just going to play another short video now, and then we'll come back to the panel and ask them a few more questions. Lovely. So I hope that video was helpful. So that was just a highlight of some of the projects that are being showcased over the lunchtime sessions. So hopefully some of you will be able to join some of those other sessions. So we're just going to carry on and just ask a couple more questions. So Sian, what's next for the projects in your area or in Wales? Got Sian on the call? I can't see Sian.
Ah. Do you want me to answer that question?
Would you mind if you want to?
No. Sian, if you appear, just interrupt me. Yeah, so as you've heard from previous answers, this is a really much needed project, and it's been well received by colleagues and delivered in a really difficult year when primary care has been overwhelmed with challenges related to the pandemic. You've heard from us about the need for GPs to be well trained and supported in the area of safeguarding, and this is exactly what this project achieved, admittedly in a smaller scale than we hoped because of the pandemic. But given better circumstances, we know it would have achieved even more. We know this year has seen a rise in safeguarding issues, and it's also for this reason that the project should now spread out further across Wales with the aim of having cluster safeguarding leads available in every cluster for the people working there. All of us involved would like to continue with our roles with the work that we've started. Some of us are keen to develop some face-to-face meetings moving forwards, whereas others are seeing the benefit of continuing with virtual meetings, especially those working with a sort of larger, more rural geography. The project, though, relies on the enthusiasm and engagement of its GPs and needs dedicated time and headspace for it to run and work at its best. If the challenges faced by COVID continue, then it would be difficult to see a way forward despite the need. Gaining funding, as I've said, is a key hurdle, and having this from clusters seems like the best way forward, although it's a challenge in this current climate. Safeguarding cluster leads need to be recruited, so there needs to be a focus on demonstrating the value of our groups and what we offer to clusters to encourage them to support us. To help facilitate this, the idea has been taken on as one of the key work streams of the Welsh Medical Committee with the support of Frank Atherton, the Chief Medical Officer. We're also presenting the idea to the Royal College of GPs Welsh Council in a couple of weeks to try and raise awareness and hopefully encourage more potential cluster leads to step forward. And finally, always, we'd welcome any advice or support that might help us facilitate any funding streams for this important work. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you. And so, Sharon, perhaps you could tell us what are your recommendations for GP clusters considering introducing the service?
Thank you. So we're all, aware, and, when you're presenting to clusters, they're all going to be aware that it's really, really important to safeguard children and vulnerable adults. And the need to have GPs who prioritise the protection of the most vulnerable individuals in our society. And, that's why we insist that GP trainees achieve a certain level of safeguarding training. And that's why GPs, every year they practice, have to demonstrate that they're maintaining this high level. But there isn't any training that prepares GPs for the level of complexity that they often encounter in general practice. Because safeguarding in general practice has got a massive scope from protecting unborn children right up to the vulnerable elderly. And it can involve the subtleties of trying to evidence emotional harm to the children of a parent with severe mental health problems, to taking steps to protect children from the risks of physical harm in a violent home, to then having to negotiate with a teenager who's at risk of sexual exploitation, who doesn't realise that she's being abused and thinks that she's in a loving relationship for the first time in her life. So that scope and complexity puts a heavy emotional burden on the GPs who volunteer effectively to be safeguarding leads within their practices. And certainly those challenging and difficult cases contribute to loss of resilience and burnout. And particularly during the pandemic, I think that burden's increased because many other services who are involved with these individuals have been unable to offer as much support. And general practice, I think, has become one of the few services where vulnerable children and adults and families can access a professional directly. So that means that GPs are more likely to be presented with safeguarding issues, but also less likely to have access to the information from other services to help them in their decision making. So if you can imagine that you're a newly appointed safeguarding lead, fully trained up, enthusiastic and committed to your new role, and then you come across cases like these, and I think it's only really by just having an idea of the complexity that you can understand the strain it places. So for instance, if you've got a patient who you think has fabricated her illness and has told her children that she's terminal, so you know from your principles that the needs of the child are paramount, but how do you evidence the emotional harm to her children whilst maintaining the patient's confidentiality and good medical care for her and her whole extended family who are all your patients? Another example is teenage children, two teenagers having a baby together, the strains get to them and that relationship becomes violent. So you know from basic principles that you have to prioritise the needs of the child, but they're all children. So the parents are children themselves and may have their own issues. For instance, they may be still a looked after child, or they may have abusing parents themselves. Or and this is a particularly difficult one in general practice, where you have a patient of yours who's suffering, say, domestic abuse in the form of coercive control. You could have the perpetrator as your patient, the patient as your patient, the victim, and the children, and the extended family of both of the adults. So how are you going to balance all their needs, their relationships with you, when you know that domestic abuse causes emotional harm to children, even if they're not obviously at risk of physical harm? And particularly if you're aware of the stresses both the parents are under, because they're both seeing you as their GP. So you know what you should do, but how do you keep that doctor-patient relationship going while protecting the children? And nothing in your training gives you definitive answers in those situations. And it's quite isolating to try and work through those situations. So imagine a group of maybe half a dozen other local safeguarding leads where you could discuss those cases in a confidential and supportive setting, and between you kind of tease out those safeguarding principles, what you know about best practice, to give a reasonable solution for each of those scenarios. And then you've got the confidence to know that a group of your peers, some of whom have more experience than you, would make a similar decision. So therefore you feel supported in making those difficult decisions. So in conclusion, these safeguarding groups are essential to support GPs in that challenging role, but they are going to need time out from their responsibilities as a GP in order to prioritise those groups, given all of the other demands of general practice at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. And a bit of a recurring theme coming up there around time, definitely, isn't there? So, Sian, I'm sorry. I think we kind of, you had a few problems. You disappeared for a moment. So Rowena answered, but I didn't know whether there was anything you particularly wanted to add onto that. You're on mute.
I didn't hear her answer, so I don't know, I'm afraid. But yeah, I was watching another session somehow.
Oh dear. Okay. All right. So I think Rowena gave kind of the answer that you were planning to give. But if there's anything else you want to come back into, we've got time to kind of focus on that. Absolutely. Okay. So I think that's really hopeful to understand the work that you've been doing and some of those challenges. And I think it would be interesting to explore. You've talked a little bit about your next steps in terms of going to the Royal College of GPs and seeking ways to obtain funding. I'm just wondering, from a strategic programme for primary care point of view and the work that we're doing on clusters, obviously that's kind of really key. So what opportunities might there be to link into the programme, do you think, in terms of that community infrastructure? Have you kind of got any thoughts about maybe how the programme can help, or who else could help support you going forwards in rolling out this really innovative work, which is doing such good for the community?
Shall I answer that? I guess in a way, this is we're trying to be as positive as we possibly can be. This has definitely been one of the hurdles. I had a presentation all ready to go. I'd got a locum booked to present this sort of project to the cluster leads that they meet quarterly, I think. And the day before, I was cancelled because there wasn't time to fit me into the agenda. It didn't fit with their priorities, which was kind of frustrating on a personal level. And then I've tried to get back on an agenda moving forwards, but of course we've had the pandemic. So I guess as GPs, we're good at being GPs. We're particularly interested in safeguarding. We're good at being safeguarding leads. I'm not particularly good at the whole kind of managing clusters, begging for money, getting myself on an agenda. That is completely not my skill set. And I guess that's where we need some help and support, really. We need people to recognise just honestly how important this is for individual families and people, but actually for us as a society, and also us as a sort of financially carefully managing society. This will save a huge amount of money. If we can pick up problems before they become crises, we will save the NHS and possibly the police and the ambulance service and, schools, social services, a whole variety of public health areas will save money if we can prevent these problems. So for the sake of, it's such a tiny amount of money we're asking for as well. I've often been told, crikey, what you need to do is ask for a lot more. You're more likely to get more money than less money. It's not an enormous amount, but it does make a huge difference. So I guess anyone who can offer any of us any advice how we can push this forward with the clusters, or if there's any other transformation pots of money that we could turn to, I'm all ears. But that's not my particular skill set.
Oh, it's really hard, isn't it? And I think there probably is something that through the strategic programme I can take back. I can share the work that you've been doing and look at how we can put that on the radar and how we can support you, definitely, from that perspective. So
yeah, we'd really appreciate that.
Yes, absolutely. No, it's such innovative work and has such the potential, doesn't it, to support individuals. And the cases that you've been able to share with us today, it would be a shame for us not to be able to support that going forward. So I guess we've talked a little bit about some of those challenges, and obviously time's one of the major ones. How have you found it with engagement of the rest of your GP colleagues and your practice staff? Have you found that quite easy, or is time a similar issue for them, or is there kind of any other challenges that you've particularly identified when working with your colleagues?
I think it's a worrying one, and this is one of the things that first led me to establish our group in Monmouthshire, because I'm an appraiser. I know how important safeguarding is, so it's always a question I ask when I'm appraising people. What are you doing in your practice? How do you manage your safeguarding concerns? And from there, I'd hear stories of really excellent things that practices are doing, and you think, gosh, that's great. We should all be doing this. How can we work it that information is shared? But equally, I'd appraise people who are saying, well, we haven't really got any safeguarding problems. And just a blanket response, if they've got no one on the child protection register, they assume that all of their children in their practice area are safe. And that's it's almost the ones that are on the register are already being looked after and are safer. It's the ones that aren't recognised yet that we need to be looking out for. So I think the answer is, we all need to be doing a bit more, and we need to sort of up the standard, for all practices to those that are doing the most, really.
Lovely, thank you. And just throwing that question open to the rest of the panel, is that something that you're finding the same in your practices, or have you had different experiences? Should I start with?
Sorry.
No, carry on, Sharon, please.
Enthusiasm has been great, but it's been hampered by just the unprecedented demand of COVID. And I think lots of doctors, being an appraiser previously, people want to get their level 3 training. They want to talk to others about safeguarding issues. But it's been one of those years that people have just been overwhelmed. So I think it's a great project, but it certainly has been hampered by GPs' time having to go elsewhere with vaccinations and things. But yeah, so, and particularly in my area, we also had a few mergers of practices, which merging in COVID was difficult, let alone trying to sort of think about safeguarding. I think the issue of safeguarding also is a big issue, but as primary care at the moment, I don't feel we're seeing as much because we're not seeing the patients as much. I think this is a time bomb that's going to happen, and that's even more reason, I suppose, why this project should be continuing, and we should be preparing for this as it happens. I think the police are seeing a lot, but and we're getting a lot of paperwork, but we're not necessarily seeing the impact. That's my experience. I don't know about other people.
Okay. Laura, can I come to you and ask what your thoughts are about that, both what Rowena and Sian have said actually? Is that a kind of a similar experience?
Yeah, I think with we had, not my practice in particular, but one of the three of the cluster practices merged during COVID, which from the safeguarding peer group point of view, reduced 3 leads to 1 at a time that was stressful for them. Also, there was a few other changes with other practices, so it actually reduced our numbers to 4, which was good and bad in that there were fewer people to try and engage. But if one person didn't want to or was resisting, it was really difficult because that's 1/4. But it worked out. We had a face-to-face meeting recently, and everyone's really taking it on and really enthusiastic. And as I said earlier, I've managed to secure funding through sort of I've just discussed it a few times with the cluster lead GPs, and sort of planted the seed, and then found out when the meeting was and sort of put a proposal in, just sort of I've sneaked it on the agenda, and that worked out quite nicely. But yeah, I don't know. It's been a challenging time, but I was very careful not to try and overstep the mark either. I didn't want to bombard people that are very stressed. The work pressures were great, and although, as Sian said, that we haven't been seeing face-to-face as many over the course of the year, but we've been in a lot of contact, and I found that really daunting. In particular, young people who haven't been at school with mental health issues, who actually people are getting more used to this interaction over a screen or a telephone, and it's really difficult to try and get the true idea of what's going on. And young people are actually quite resistant, I find, of coming down face to face. So there's been a few levels of challenges, I think, both with colleagues getting people on board, but also in terms of the patients and trying to establish what is actually going on at home. I found that with COVID, the interaction through just not having them in your room has presented real challenges. But I've become someone who's just come down. That's my new approach in the last few weeks, which is helpful, but most people don't. A few phone calls normally, and then they start to engage, and then we'll come and see you face to face, and you learn a lot more. But it's just difficult, and it's very easy to put that aside if someone's resisting coming down or quite happy to talk remotely. When you're faced with 18 other people to contact, it's, for other GPs who aren't maybe functioning with safeguarding as top of the list, at the moment, it's very easy to sometimes cast that aside and just deal with what's on the surface, and you never really get to the root of the problem. Sorry, I've answered a few, sort of darted around a bit. But yeah, that's my experience in summary.
I think that's really interesting, isn't it? And it does really kind of reflect the difficulties of when you're not seeing people face to face, and when you're busy, and having that perseverance and real commitment to actually understanding that one-off contact might not be enough. Sharon, what are your thoughts around this?
So certainly around the challenges, one of the biggest challenges for our cluster was that so COVID, first lockdown was around March. By May, one of our practices had the GP had resigned, and so there were about 3,500 to 4,000 very, very demanding, difficult patients. Lots of substance misuse were spread around the other practices in our cluster. So there are 6 practices. There were 7. They were down to 6. And actually, because geographically we weren't so badly affected, it meant that all the people I was trying to contact had about 800 new patients. And so that was really, really challenging because, as Laura said, you don't want to bombard people. I think our email inboxes are already far fuller than they ever were pre-pandemic. And the other challenge for me was I managed to get to one cluster meeting to present in person. And I find it much, much easier presenting in person. And I've found it quite difficult to adapt to online. It's got to be done. But I was very enthusiastic about having meetings in person, and I'm very much less enthusiastic. And so for me, that meant that I lost some of the oomph within myself to try and to do these, because having a meeting with coffee and cake is very different from turning a computer on and looking at your face on a screen.
Absolutely.
So there's some personal and practice difficulties we had.
Oh, absolutely. It is very strange. It's a totally different way of working, isn't it? And I think we all miss the biscuits and cake and the coffee.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Rachel, what are your thoughts? You've got anything that you specifically want to pull out, or you agree or disagree with?
Oh, very much agree. Certainly, like Sharon said, I think trying to formulate a group of colleagues for some who you've never met is very different, via online forums as opposed to being in a room. It's quite hard to develop that rapport. So it was quite difficult in that sense. I suppose one thing COVID did lend itself to is that a lot of our cluster meetings became online. So whilst we were discussing hot hubs and different things, you started being able to put faces to names, which did help. I've certainly had a lot more contact with my health visitor team through COVID, purely by the fact that I know they weren't going into houses. I was probably more flagging issues as opposed to it would have been them previously. So certainly in terms of email contact and, virtual contact with my health visitor team, that really has enhanced during COVID. And I've also been able to attend child protection meetings for once, where normally we get a few days notice asking for a report on our attendance. And, I've been able to attend these because I can allow an hour within a surgery to attend these meetings, which has been really valuable. And it's like Rowena said, you can put faces to names in terms of social workers and health visitors, and you're picking up a phone and it's far more personable. So as much as there's been huge drawbacks in terms of COVID, I think we do have to take those little glimmers of positivity as well. And certainly as a group, the 6 of us working together has been great. We've all had our different trials and tribulations trying to get this up and running, which I think will go on as we carry on planning this. But just the ability to be able to email each other and bounce ideas off each other has really been invaluable. So I think we've got a long way to go, but we've got some foundations there.
Thank you. And I think what shows through to me is really the commitment that you all have in terms of this way of working, the benefits it's brought to you, both yourself personally in terms of confidence, but in that networking and that MDT approach. And I think what I've also taken from this session for me is around that breadth really kind of explained the breadth of what primary care is about and the challenges that can bring in terms of, one moment you're talking to an expectant mum and you're looking at those issues, the emotional aspect of it, and then you've got that wide range from babies up to older age. So it really is a challenge, and I kind of think what I've heard today is really positive in the way that you've all come together to support your local populations and really improve the outcomes for them. So I think it's a fantastic piece of work, and certainly I'll be going back to the strategic programme. I'll be kind of saying this is what's happening and how can we support you going forwards in terms of looking at that, particularly some of those challenges around funding and finding the time to carry on and do the work that you're doing. So I'd just like to extend a really heartfelt thank you to you all for taking part and for sharing your experiences. I've learned lots and I really appreciate it. And I hope those of you who have been attending today have really enjoyed this session, and hopefully you will also spend some time looking and reviewing some of the other work that has been carried out. So thank you very much for joining us, and please do keep in touch.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.